Hi there, I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Gothi of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to the Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy, sets my mind on fire at the time. Big UPG warning at the beginning of this, like always. This is my take on the world. It's just the view of one heathen, one Gothi here in East Texas. I am by no means representative of heathenry as a whole. There really is no representation of heathenry as a whole because of tribal and regional differences, etc., etc. So just take these conversation starters as what they're meant to be. Conversation starters. They're meant to get you thinking out of the box and exploring maybe from a different point of view than maybe you have before. So just keep that in mind. So, all of my contact information is down below. You guys that have been watching the channel for a while know, yes, I do have a book out. I am working on back work ideas and stuff for my second book. I've got some really strong ideas on how I want to put it together. I've done some base notes and stuff like that. I still need to start putting pen to paper on actually writing said book, but I'm in outlining and planning and prompt phase. So there will be a second book. I just don't know exactly when. It's going to be an ongoing project, and with me working insane hours. Insane. With me working insane hours, I don't have time to write right now, but I do have the ideas, so I'm trying to flesh it out and turn it into a thing. But in the meantime, the Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson is out there. Feel free to check it out on Amazon, and yeah, it's on the Kindle store, I believe. And then we'll let me know. Please leave a review if you've read it. They help. They really help. It's got 5-star reviews for both the ebook and the paperback. I take that back. I may have gotten a 2-star review from one person, but I'm not entirely certain they actually read the book. They may have just done it on my name alone. There are a few people out there that don't like me for numerous reasons. Whatever. I don't care. Not my hall, not my call. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. Today's subject is a write-in. It was really a write-in for just kind of a one-on-one question because this person's relatively new to heathenry, but it was a subject I haven't really touched on in a video before, and I wanted to go ahead and delve into this. So I don't even have a full name for this person. So Mika, thank you for the question that gave birth to this video. Hopefully this helps to flesh out some of the questions you have. You got my reply email, hopefully, and this is to help kind of flesh that out more, and hopefully for everybody else, look into a different aspect of heathenry. So the question was pertaining to the dwarves, or dvergar. Now, I have seen numerous terms for the dwarves. There's the dvergar, there's the svartalfs, there's the dwarves. There's a number of different terms, and essentially, the most of them translate to dark elves. Vast majority of the names for the dwarves translate to dark elves, and somewhere along the way they got the moniker of dwarf. But they are kind of a counter to the Ljosalf. I can almost speak today. The Ljosalf are the light elves, or the typically seen as the denizens of Ljosalfheim, or in a lot of times Vanaheim, are seen as, some connections there. But the dwarves were seen as, in the creation mythos, as being created from the maggots that were rolling around in Ymir's body when Ymir was slain and turned into Midgard, into the worlds. And they rose up, and the core lore, as far as the base lore of it goes, the origin lore, is kind of limited. We just have a few mentions of where they came from as far as in the extant origin story elements, which we think to be probably fairly heavily metaphoric, but they were seen as ground dwellers, underground,
and these chthonic individuals. And then the rest of the stories, especially the god stories, really flesh out the dwarves as crafters, as makers, and you get into, you know, Doran's folk and a lot of, like, if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings, a lot of the names that they used for the dwarves in the Lord of the Rings were names for dwarves pulled straight from the Eddas. The Owen, Bowen, Glowen, all of that, they're all from the lore in some aspects throughout the Eddas. And so you can go through and read your Poetic Edda and pretty much get what exists as far as dwarven lore from the mythos, because that's pretty much the crux of where you see it. And some of the big things that play into effect with the dwarves were stories pertaining to things like the crafting of Mjolnir. That's probably the most commonly known, wherein the dwarves, Loki goes out and entices two different sets of dwarves to craft items and gifts for the gods. This is where we get Skidbladnir, which is Frey's ship. We get Gungnir. This is where we get Mjolnir and a number of other items that were precious gifts to the gods, all in a competition, and then the winner gets Loki's head, all this stuff. It's the story where Loki goes through, turns into a fly, bites the eye of the dwarf so that he messes up on crafting Mjolnir so that he'd lose the bet. But he actually wins the bet because the gods still recognize the masterwork that is Mjolnir, and Loki loses his head in the bet. But of course, Loki, in his double talk and trickstery, is like, "Look, you can have my head, but you can't have my neck. So how do you remove my head if you don't have access to my neck? We're gonna get rules lawyery on it." And of course, they sew his mouth shut, and etc., etc. So. Fun story, awesome story, shows the essence of the dwarves as being tied to master craft work. And then, of course, there's also the story of the dwarves in pertaining to Freyja's necklace, the Brazingen, or Brazingen, depending on pronunciation. Now, I think the second one's actually the more accurate historically. So the Brazingen, which is this commonly viewed as an amber necklace as far as in modern times. It's kind of dodgy as to what the actual representation of it by the gods would be, most likely laden in gold, from what I've been able to discern from the stories. But amber is in and of itself like tree gold. And so there is, and that's my kenning, not one that I've pulled from the lore. I use the term tree gold for amber, simply because that's what it is to me. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. And so this is where a lot of people will pull the common modern day practice of women wearing, well, anyone wearing amber as a representation of their devotion to Freyja. This is tied to the whole, like in the story of Older with Freyja's tears of gold. They are golden tears, but could also be seen as amber. So I'm sure there's some really good historical research that's been done on this. I haven't delved too terribly far into that particular aspect because it's not a major focus for me. This is an association that I have, but if it's something you're interested in, I'm sure you can delve further in and find some extant research and literature exploring the nature of amber to classical heathen or Viking Age and pre-Viking Age use of amber in relation to the Lady Freyja. But nonetheless, that's not the point of the video. So the point of the whole video is, how does one work with the dwarves? This is an interesting thing. We've talked about who the dwarves are, where they come from, what their deal is. But how does one work with them? Who works with the dwarves? Why would you work with the dwarves in a ritual setting? The original email asked me something a little bit about, I can't find an official name for followers of the dwarves. Like you've got, there's different names for like Asatru, Vanatru, as far as working with the different tribes of gods. Yes, there are those individuals that work with the giants. I don't talk about that for obvious reasons. I have before. If you don't want, go look at my Rokotru video if you want to know about that one. But not a really official name for working with the dwarves. Well, the truth is that aside from, Well, no, not aside from anything. All of the modern names that we have for the followings are modern names. Asatru is a modern development. It is not a classical name. It's not a name that dates back to heathen times. Even referring to ourselves as heathens is a modern moniker that we have adopted. Classically speaking, heathen was the term that they used to refer to followers of the old ways back in Northern Europe, and that is in an unironic and / ironic way. Heathens have adopted that term as our moniker in the modern age. So, I use the term heathen when I refer to myself. There's also Norse pagan, Germanic pagan, Anglo-Saxon pagan, and then umpteen jillion different subsects and followings of different elements of heathenry, specific god cults, all of that. So why not a name for followers of the dwarves? Well, there may be one, honestly. There may be, but I guarantee you if there is one, it's something that local grassroots folks have chosen to take upon themselves, which is how it works. I'm fine with that. That's not a problem. If I were to actually boil down my belief structure and the way that I see things, I would say that my belief structure is Ridgar, because I have a lot in common with other heathens, and heathen is easier to say than try to break down and say, well, what's your religion called? Well, Ridgar, which is my tribe, my folk. But our brand of heathenry is different than some other people's. As you guys following the channel have probably seen, my brand of heathenry is different than a number of folks. It's also jives a lot with a number of my viewers, which is the reason that I keep making the videos, is because I keep getting those comments that say, finally somebody that sees things the way that I see them, that is willing to put something out there on video. Okay, cool, I'll keep doing it. So there probably is a name out there for working with the dwarves. I just am not familiar with one. I could come up with one real quick. That wouldn't be a problem. But, because it could be Dvergatru. Boom, there you go, working with the dwarves. True faith to the dwarves. Truth to the dwarves. But here's the deal. Working with the dwarves is different than working with the gods and goddesses. When you boil down to it, the reason that there's a main religious focus on working with the gods is because they are the gods. They are of the divine. They are of the race that slew Ymir and created the world. The dwarves are of Ymir, that is the created world. The dwarves are of the profane world, which means the dwarves themselves are more a mix of the material plane and the spiritual plane than they are a manifestation of divine or sacred energies. So that pushes them more into the category of working with the Lanvitir. I wouldn't necessarily categorize them as a Lanvitir, although there are some arguments you could say that they might be. But in that, you've got Svartalfheim, I don't know that it's necessarily a correlate to associate them with Lanvitir. That's something that I think merits more conversation. But it does put them on the same level of interaction as Lanvitir. The reason is that they are lesser spiritual beings. They're great amongst the spiritual beings, but they're lesser than gods. So it's, instead of doing the sacred religious work up here, you're working down here in the spiritual realm of things. Kind of like working with our ancestors, and kind of like working with the Lanvitir or our Husvitir or any other number of spiritual entities. And if you follow the channel, you'll see I place a great deal of focus on these spiritual interactions because I find them to be key and intrinsic to the essence of heathenry. We are a very folk-centric way of life, worldview. It's very focused on family, it's very focused on tribe, it's very focused on your immediate community and things like that. Working with the Lanvitir, working with your ancestors, working with your Husvitir. And working with the Lanvitir, I've said this before in separate videos, you build a kind of communal respect with the Lanvitir, but you do not work with the Lanvitir on the same way that you work with your Husvitir, because your Husvitir is the one that has domain over your home and your work lands. Now, working with the dwarves, I find that most of the people I know that work with the dwarves are craftsmen of some kind, craftsmen, craftswomen. They work with their hands. A lot of blacksmiths will look to the dwarves and do their work with the dwarves there. If you look back, there are cases of revering local gods like gods with a small g, which I would say is more along the lines of like an alpha Landvetir, and seeing them as like the god of the lake, the god of the forest, and then working with those entities and building a relationship with those entities. This is what I see a lot in correlation with working with the dwarves. An individual who is trying to hone their craft may work with this entity to try and build a relationship and build luck with this entity, build Gefrain with this entity, so that they can master their craft. And that is a beautiful thing. That's a great thing, and I love to see people embrace that and do that. It is not the same as worshiping the gods. It's actually something that can be done alongside of worshiping the gods. You can still hold main festivals to the gods and goddesses and work with the dwarves with relation to your crafting and all of that. A lot of guys I know that work blacksmithing, guys and gals both, will use their anvil as sort of their altar to the dwarves, to the Dvergar. And that's a really cool thing, because most of the offerings that are left to the Dvergar, to the dwarves, are handcrafted, hand-worked, lots of metalworks, but it can be just about anything. They seem to be very tied to crafted items, things that you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into. And the more impressive the work, the more work that goes into it, the more heart and soul that's poured into it, the better the offering is for them. So I see a lot of people who will like craft blades or craft jewelry or will craft items that would be used for household work and things of value, things that have energy poured into them, because you are literally pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into it by working it over the forge or by toiling away at a saw, sander, sandpaper, your chiseling tools, whatever it may be. You may be blowing glass. You may be working in chainsaw art. You know, it's physical manifestations of art put into crafted items. And a lot of times what the dwarves like to focus on are items that are both art and practical at the same time. Doesn't mean they don't just make items for art sometimes. I mean, jewelry in and of itself is a wonderful way to honor the dwarves, because we have Brazingen, and that is something that is very intrinsically tied to the dwarves. So there is precedent set for working with jewelry and the dwarves. And anything that deals in the kind of subterranean world of materials, casting clay, working with clay in sculpture or pottery, ceramics, whatever it may be. The dwarves themselves probably are not going to be as drawn to like poets and performers and bards and musicians. You're going to see these people lean more towards Bragi or Odin and tie more to the divine madness of the creativity therein. The dwarves are going to be those down and dirty spirits that really focus on the getting your hands dirty and pouring your lifeblood into working on an item and creating something of value that is in the here and the now and the material. That's what they work with, the material. And that's, I think, what a lot of people enjoy about the draw of working with the dwarves. It is in the material plane. It's something you can get your hands on. It's something that you can do. And then you craft something, you make it, you offer it to the dwarves, and then they grant you luck that builds your strength as an artisan. You're building your strength as an artisan both by going through and building your relationship with the dwarves and just sheerly going through the art of doing your art for the dwarves. So I can think of a couple of different tribes I know personally that work heavily with the dwarves in relation to their spiritual practices and their crafting. And these are individuals that do both blacksmithing and a lot of yarn work, surprisingly. But it's all dealing with hands-on stuff. It's all dealing with material, crafted items, and that's their wheelhouse. That's what they're good at. That's what they do. You know, I mean, one of the items that we get from the dwarves is the spun gold that replaces Sif's hair after Loki cuts it off. You know, they're the ones that are responsible for forging Glipnir, which is the ribbon that is used to bind Fenris in the Fenris and Tyr story. So the dwarves are known for epic, beautiful, magical items that are practical and yet art, all at the same time. And that's what artisans strive for. They strive to create things that are not just practical items, but art. And if you look back at the cultural and archaeological leavings that we find with relation to heathen times, you will find that Northern Europeans liked to decorate everything. Everything. It wasn't just a door hinge. It was a door hinge with filigree and all kinds of engravings or hatchwork or whatever to make it look beautiful. You know, all their accent work that they did. An axe wasn't just an axe. It had knotwork done into it. And it became a beautiful thing, but was still practical, was still pragmatic, and was still something that was used. And so there's this blending of the pragmatic and the fantastic. And that's where an artisan's true magic lies. And I have seen artisans today that definitely have dwarven magic in what they do, because the things they turn out have no business being as wonderful as they are. They are beautiful. So whether you're a sculptor or a blacksmith or a carpenter or, you know, whatever medium you work with, whether you're, you know, even if you're blowing glass or working with pottery, if you're getting your hands dirty and doing the job, you're working in the realm of the dwarves. So, you know, building a relationship with them might not be bad. So anyway, I hope that helps to kind of clarify a few things. I do specifically differentiate between the sacred and the spiritual, and I put the dwarves in the realm of spiritual as opposed to sacred because they're not gods. They were made by the gods as a result of, you know, Ymir's corpse and the progression thereof. At least they arose from that. It's not explicitly stated that the gods created the dwarves, but the dwarves came from the maggots of Ymir that was going through Ymir's flesh. They were digging through the earth and came out, and the gods recognized them. And so they are separate from the gods. They're not in the divine aspect of things, but more in the profane aspect of things, which makes them more approachable in a lot of ways and makes them good dealings to deal with. Now, there are some pitfalls in dealing with the dwarves as far as, you know, dwarven dealings and dwarves being sticklers for quality over quantity. You know, if you're going to do an offering to the dwarves for, you know, building luck with your forge, it's the easiest thing to go for. If you're trying to build something, regardless of your medium, we'll use the forge for an example. If you're trying to build the luck of your forge, you want to give good quality items. You want to pour your heart and soul into it. And it may not be showroom quality, but if it's the best you can do, then it makes an excellent offering because the dwarves recognize growth and development towards your goal as an artist and will encourage that because they're competitive a lot too. They like to compete against each other to see who can make better things. So they strive for perfection in artwork and in practicality. So they build these things. I mean, if you look at Skidbladnir, the boat that's given to Freud as a result of the same competition, it is a boat, practical boat, beautiful boat, gorgeous boat. It folds up and fits in a pocket. Magical, yes, but beautiful and pragmatic. I mean, it's a wonderful magical item that you instant boat. It's a wonderful thing. It's incredible. So I love seeing people create things the same kind of way. You know, you've got individuals that are like, hey, look at, you know, carpenters that build insets into walls, and then you walk in their house and it's like, oh look, it's a nice, beautiful house. It's normal. And then they flip a button and everything flips around, and it's a surround sound theater. Or they've got, you know, a pirate bar in their basement, something like that. There's creativity there that's involved from the manual labor of putting your hands to work and creating something from the ether. There's magic in that. And so I highly encourage those that are lean that way to do that and to share your stories, because obviously there's more people out there like you and they're interested, they're curious, and they want to know more. So share. I recommend getting on different forums pertaining to your particular art to help build your art. Know other artisans and how they do things. Maybe learn some tricks of the trade. But it never hurts to start venturing into dwarves and seeing what kind of magic they may bring to your world as well. So anyway, hopefully that helped out some. Maybe it was an interesting diversion from what we're normally going through on the channel. It is definitely something that's long overdue to talk about. And I will maybe come back and revisit some working with the dwarves and stuff later when I've had a chance to go back and actually bone up on some more research. This is one that I could do a lot of research on and have a lot of fun with, and talk to a few individuals I know that do work with the dwarves and get some of their stories. So if you got stories of working with the dwarves, then please pop them in the comments below, pop them in the Facebook group. Let us hear them, let us share. I would love to hear your stories and see what your experiences have been. So in the meantime, hail to you all, thank you, and may your hearth fires, and maybe your forge fires, burn bright. Okay, let's try and do this. Ooh, it's muggy. My shirt is just like soaked with sweat. All right, so not much for the post credits today. We did have D&D this past weekend. I will probably catch up with more stories on that in the next session, in the next video or whatever, for those that are interested. Nobody really talks about it much. I get some I get some comments and stuff that indicate people enjoy my D&D talk, and then I get others where it's like, you know, nothing's mentioned. So I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. But we did have a session this past weekend. It was epic. It was great. I mean, it wasn't exactly epic, but it was fantastic. It was wonderful. We had a great time. My team did a lot of setting up for missions coming up, and they started doing some groundwork on a mission that I'd laid out for them. And it was really cool because when I first initially built this particular quest, I figured I figured they would just kind of barrel into it, and instead they went all like Midsummer Murders, investigaty, little Sherlock Holmesy kind of private detective look around dig, and I was really enjoying it. They surprised me with that, and I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. So another pro DM tip is let your players lead the play style for whatever it is you end up doing, because I guarantee you, one of the main rules of improv is to yes and accept what they give you and build upon it. So even if you kind of design something to be something else and they lead down a road where you kind of want to see where this goes, embrace it and roll with it. I had the capacity there built for the whole kind of mystery aspect of deals, but it wasn't really what I expected them to do. So when they embraced the whole mystery side of things, I was like, yes, let's do this, let's roll with it. I'll work. I had plenty to work with. I didn't actually have to improv much, but I did have a lot of fun going into areas I didn't necessarily expect them to delve into right away. And what's great is they decided to grab a whole bunch of them off the bounty board, and they rolled through town and were like, well, we're going to look into this one and see how pressing it is. Because we've got two that are kind of next to each other, and then there's one that's way up north. And the one that's way up north is a dragon hunt, and it's just basically for money, plus, save the villagers from the dragon, etc., etc. But as far as the two that are down here, there's one that sounds like it's urgent. There might be somebody in danger, and we can go save them. Or there's this one that's milling and growing, and we really don't know what it is. And my intention was to kind of stasis lock these things so that whenever they showed up, it initiated the roll for this particular quest. Only by looking into this one and starting here and then deciding they're going to go chase the other one that sounds like there may be some more imminent danger, and then to come back, I get to track like how long they take doing this other one and then progress the one that they passed up, so there's consequences for their choices. I'm excited for this. This is going to be fun. I always enjoy when my players throw cool and inventive different ways of looking at things. They actually entered into kind of a moral quandary over which of these they should do, and I had so much fun. I did a lot of like one-on-one scenes with a couple of them. My rogue got caught, put in jail, so he had to do his little jailbreak. But the whole time I'm doing that with him, DMing his little mini escapade getting out of jail, the rest of the team is sandboxing, preparing for these missions. And so I just said, all right, look, whatever supplies you need, if it's in the basic handbook, like cart, rope, stuff like that, Just buy for face value off of the player's handbook, and then let me know what it is you guys have picked up so I know what's in your inventory and how much money you've spent. Because we got plenty of money. I'm not super worried about that. But yeah, it was fantastic. Great thing is I have a team I can trust, and I can let them sandbox and just kind of do their thing, and I know they're going to tell me, okay, well, we got this, and this, and we're groovy. And I'm like, cool, I love that. That's fantastic. I don't have to go through and make up numbers for all this because you guys are cool with the market value for basic supplies, and then we'll haggle for magical items. I highly recommend doing this too. Just say, look, if it's in the book as basic supplies, just go with the face value on the basic supplies, and then let them haggle over the magical items. You don't want to be haggling over grappling hooks. It gets tedious and stupid. Unless you're playing a real low-power game. If you're playing like no magic item game, then yeah, get your haggling in on basic supplies, but understand that they're going to want to haggle for everything after that, and shopping excursions for things like caltrops and ball bearings can end up being an all-evening affair. If you just say, all right, you go to market and you find what you need, then they can focus on their planning and all this stuff. Now, I mean, it's not always, they're in the capital city, so they can find whatever they want. If they're out in the middle of podunk nowhere, then options are going to be a lot more limited, and that's where DM steps in and says, well, you can't really find what you're looking for. You may be able to makeshift something, or you may be able to make do, or you may be able to craft something, but anyway, flexibility. Flexibility is key. So anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and roll into today's subject because I'm kind of crunched for time, and I just wanted to touch a little bit on the D&D thing. So let's do this. We're live in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam.